start with introductions first of all. So as Amy said, my name is Berwyn. I'm the marketing manager for Rentokil Pest Control. I've been with the business now for over 20 years, starting as a technician. I've done various sort of technical roles and operational roles, eventually ending up in marketing. If I can just sort of hand over to my colleague to introduce himself.
Yes, hello, I'm Paul Blackhurst. I'm the Head of Technical Academy for Rentokil Pest Control. I've been in pest control coming up to 14 years now, in various roles, mainly in technical management, and then Head of Technical Academy within this business.
Excellent, thank you, Paul. So to take you through the agenda of what we're going to be going through today. So first of all, we'll sort of set the scene on the key challenges for UK businesses, specifically with regards to pest control. So what are the challenges that the commercial businesses have out there? We'll then run through the rodent risk to your business. So obviously, if you do develop activity, whether it be mice or rats or some sort of infestation, what are actually the risks to your business? I'll then hand over to Paul to talk around about rodents and around about the biology and the characteristics, and so just keeping to the facts of how they could potentially sort of result in problems associated with your business, and then obviously what you can do to actually protect yourselves. And then, as Amy said, we'll have some time at the end as well in order to do a Q&A session. So obviously any questions that you have throughout the webinar, just obviously hold on to those, and then we can answer them at the end. Okay, so let me just start with the key pest challenges for UK businesses. So, the first thing that UK businesses want out there is, of course, not to have any rodent pests in the first place. That boils down to prevention, monitoring, and control. So, there needs to be a first line of defense in order to reduce the risk of rodents actually getting into businesses in the first place. And that could be through, making sure that you've got good proofing on site, so you keep doors closed, windows closed, you've got no gaps at the bottoms of doors, there's no holes in the walls or anything like that that could actually allow the rodent to ingress. And also by making sure that housekeeping standards are kept to a high level as well, making sure there's no food spilt anywhere and the bins are taken out. So all of that comes under sort of preventing rodents from actually accessing the premises in the first place. We then move into monitoring mode, so just to make sure that we monitor for any pests that do break that sort of first line of defense, in order to obviously give an early warning of activity. It's much easier to control one mouse or rat that actually gains access to a business rather than an infestation of rodents. And then obviously if the business does go to sort of an infestation, or if there are rodents active on those premises, we obviously move into control then in order to reduce the numbers down and eliminate that activity. The second thing is around legislation, and more importantly, just keeping you compliant with the law, really. There is a due diligence offence specifically with pest control. And obviously there are a number of different acts and regulations that are concerned with pest control, but it's about having a level of pest control on your site in order to sort of keep you protected and keep you compliant with the current legislation. And then with regards to sustainability, this is something that's probably taken a bit of a back foot due to the pandemic, but it is very important to our customers in particular. We need to control pests, but actually, we want to do it in a sustainable manner as well. And there's a number of different things that we'll talk about during this presentation, specifically around the campaign for the responsible use of rodenticide, which is all about making sure that pest control companies use rodenticides responsibly in order to protect, sort of UK wildlife. We want to make sure we target the pests rather than, all these sort of lovely woodland creatures that we have in the UK. And then secondly of all, of course, we want to control pests, but actually we want to do it in a really humane way. We don't want to see any animals suffer whatsoever. So, all of the solutions that we put out there are the most humane as possible. Okay, next slide, please, Amy. Okay, and obviously, what are the rodent risks to your business? So obviously, we'll have a sort of a first line defense in order to reduce the risk of infestations happening in the first place. But inevitably, rodents are difficult creatures to keep out of buildings. Certainly, 100%. So at some point, you may very well get a rat or a mouse actually gaining access to your premises. So what sort of risks do they cause? Well, first of all, rats and mice can contaminate and damage food products, packaging, equipment, fittings, and buildings. Obviously, they do produce quite a large amount of drop-ins, and they do continually go to the toilet as well with regards to urination. And obviously, there is a risk of them actually transmitting diseases. And again, Paul will talk a little bit later on about the risk associated with those. Externally, rodents or rats in particular, are actually very good at burrowing. And actually constant burrowing, especially with brown rats, can actually weaken retaining walls, can potentially damage sewers and embankments as well. So they can cause quite a few sort of structural problems, which could be quite expensive to rectify. And because rodents in sizes continually grow, they need to gnaw on hard materials in order to actually keep their teeth in shape. That could be metal, wood, or even sort of electrical or data cables. So, there are risks of rodents actually chewing through electrical cables, resulting in fires as well. I mean, it doesn't happen that often, thank God, but, the risk essentially is there. So, just to sum up on that, again, rodents are very clever. They are very persistent. We need to make sure that we limit the access into any building in order to reduce the risk of obviously any issues associated with those, in order to obviously save our customers time and money, and obviously, most importantly, to protect your business reputation as well. Okay, I think I'm going to hand over to Paul. Oh no, sorry, but one more slide for me. So again, just with regards to the due diligence, I mean, I mentioned it on the previous slide with regards to having a due diligence defense with regards to protecting customers against legislation. Specifically for any business that's handling food, there is a fines regime in place that's been put into place for any business that actually gets it wrong. I've done a bit of a quick search on Google. You can see the sort of the image on the left hand side of the screen there. If you sort of type in wherever you are, so rodent fine EHO, there will be a number of different searches that come up with regards to businesses that have actually been fined as a result of having a rodent infestation, or even just having sort of a small number of rodents on site. The fines can range anywhere from £500 all the way through to £10 million, depending on the extent of the problem and the size of the business and the culpability as well. So, the fines range all the way from 500 to 10 million. And obviously what we want to make sure is that you have some sort of due diligence defense in place, or, a pest control contractor that is actually doing whatever they need to do in order to reduce the risk of anyone being prosecuted, which obviously will then reduce the risk of any fines going forward. So it's all about just making sure that you can protect yourself, but also having a good pest control company in place that can also sort of help protect you as well. Okay, and now I think I'm going to hand over to Paul to talk around the biology around rodents. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Berwyn. So when it comes to rodents, we need to understand that rats and mice, which are the two commensal rodents that we're really dealing with in the UK, commensal rodents being those that live in close proximity to humans. They need humans to survive. But rats and mice are very, very different animals. Yes, they're rodents, but actually from their physiology and their biology and their behavior, they are very, very different. So if we were to look at the house mouse is relatively small. It's got very large prominent ears, and it has small feet, and its tail is much longer than its head and body length when you combine the two. On average, that mouse will eat around about 3 grams of food a day, and it doesn't need to take in liquid water, as long as that food is moist food, basically. So it can actually get the moisture from its food. This house mouse also likes it to be quite warm and dry. It quite likes to be in buildings. Due to its name, house mouse, it's typically associated with being in those warm buildings. Rats are very, very different. They're a much larger animal. They have a thick, hairless tail, and the tail is much shorter than the head and body length combined. They have much larger feet and smaller ears and a blunter nose as well. They eat around about 30 grams of food a day, and they tend to eat that food in different sittings, essentially. So they tend to have different meals throughout the day, and they actually hoard food as well. They quite often translocate food away and hoard it for later, whereas mice tend to sporadically feed, little and often grazing through the day. It's really, really important that we get the strategies right when it comes to these two animals, because they have very different behaviors. Mice are very inquisitive. They like to explore their environment. They like to explore new things in their environment, whereas rats have this inbuilt neophobic tendency, fear of new things. And if their environment changes, that could actually strengthen that fear and get them to avoid different things and actually avoid our new traps. In the UK, there's also a species of black rat, but it's very, very rare, and it is only confined to port areas. So you tend to find it around warehouses within ports as well. Next slide, please. When it comes to breeding strategies, house mice have a continuous breeding strategy. They're breeding throughout the year because they've got that protection of that house or the building that they're in, where it's nice and warm within the cavities. Whereas rats have a seasonal breeding strategy. Seasonal being that they're actually not breeding through the winter, but as soon as it starts warming up and the spring arrives, then that breeding season starts again. Both rats and mice have a 21-day gestation period, and they both have postpartum estrus, which means once they've given birth, they can actually then become pregnant again and very, very quickly have another set of young within the womb whilst they're weaning the others. The young are weaned within 21 days as well. So as soon as those young are weaned out of the nest, the new babies are born. So it's almost like a continuous cycle. It's really, really important to know as well that actually they become sexually mature anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks, a little bit earlier for mice when compared to rats. So one rat or one mouse can become quite a number if they're allowed to breed. Next slide, please. We talked a little bit around their feeding strategies earlier. So brown rats, they tend to feed through a couple of meals or 2 to 3 meals throughout the day. They do prefer cereals. That's their preference, their given choice. However, they're actually omnivorous. They'll eat anything provided. And it has been known for brown rats just to survive on vegetable oil, where other foodstuffs aren't available, basically. They like to feel safe when they're eating, so that's why they tend to hoard that food. If we were to give them cereals, they'll cut the cereal grain in half. So they'll eat half and leave half behind. And they need liquid water. They must have 60 ml of water on a daily basis, and it's got to be liquid. Their droppings are quite large, and they tend to group their droppings. They latrine them. They tend to go to do their droppings where they feel safe. So, and on average, they'll do around about 40 droppings. We talked about house mice having a sporadic feeding activity, little and often grazing, little nibble here, little nibble there. Again, its preference is cereals, but it will eat anything. It is omnivorous. It will eat anything that's available to it. When it eats those cereals, it kibbles the grain, almost leaving it like an apple core almost. And they're very, very messy. There'll be mess everywhere. It's like droppings all over the place within their food. They are just very, very messy eaters. Their droppings are scattered. They're very, very small in length. They're everywhere. Wherever a mouse can squeeze, they will do droppings. And because they're highly territorial, they're actually urinating in the environment to spread their urine, which has got the scent marking sort of pheromones in there. So essentially, that is really, really important to mark their territory and to warn other mice that that's their territory. Next slide, please. They are really, really phenomenally developed when it comes to their senses. The only one sense that really isn't very well developed is their eyesight. Their eyesight is pretty poor. We've got to remember these are nocturnal animals. They're living in dark areas within buildings, voids, wall voids, floor voids, roof voids. Rats live in drains. There's no natural light down there. There's no sort of man-made light in those drains. So eyesight doesn't really need to be very, very well developed. But because that's not very well developed, every other sense is highly developed. Their sense of smell is phenomenal. They can certainly detect smells far greater than we can. Their sense of hearing is far greater than the humans, and they can detect ultrasound with their hearing. And actually, they use ultrasound to communicate as well. Their sense of touch is phenomenal. They have their vibrissae, which is their whiskers. That will determine whether they can fit their head through the gap. If their head can fit in, that means the skull can pass through. The skull is the most important part of that animal because it protects the brain. And actually, if you look at their rib cage is actually hinged. So they can actually flatten their rib cage down and then squeeze the rest of the body through that very, very small gap. They also have guard hairs all over their body and all over their fur. And those guard hairs are highly sensitive. They're highly sensitive to vibration, to air movement as well. So straight away, they'll pick up and detect on any air movement, any vibration in that environment, and they know something's coming and predating on them potentially. Their sense of taste isn't that great. They can taste things, but they can't taste as well as we can as humans. The bait that we use does contain Bitrex, which is a bittering agent used to deter humans consuming it, but they can't detect it to the levels that we can. But it really is important that any rodenticides, any baits, or any attractants that we use on the traps are kept as fresh as possible. Next slide, please. Berwyn mentioned about rodent diseases, and the list of diseases that are associated with rodents, both rats and mice, is absolutely phenomenal. There's lots of different types or different ways that these diseases are spread. Some of these diseases are spread sort of just through their feet. So it's passive spread, basically. So their feet, their fur, spreading these around from the environments that they're in. Bear in mind that rats and mice, they'll feed in bins where there's waste food. Rats will come out of drains where there's fecal matter and other wastes going down there. And that fecal matter will be full of diseases itself. So they'll be transferring bacteria and viruses and things from the environment into the home and into the buildings on their fur and their feet. They carry viruses. They carry parasites, things like fleas, ticks, and they carry protozoans and worms, roundworms and things like that. All of these can affect humans. The diseases are classed as zoonotic diseases. They transfer between animal and human. One of the most famous ones is leptospirosis. Leptospirosis, if you don't treat it, can lead to Weil's disease, which is still fatal, even in today. If you don't treat it quick enough, Weil's disease can be fatal. It's only with early intervention with antibiotics do people get better, and it does still take lives today. There's different ways we can catch those diseases. It could be through inhalation or direct contact with the rodent feces, with the rodent urine. It could be handling or inhaling microorganisms, particles that are airborne from those rodents or from those feces. It could be the bites and scratches from the rodents themselves, things like rat bite fever. Or it could be drinking water or eating food that's been contaminated by rodents as they've been feeding from it or crawling over it. Next slide, please. It's really important that you reduce the risk within your business or within your home if you're a domestic property. Within Rentokil, we use the ERDM approach. E standing for exclusion. Let's keep those rodents out of the building. Let's keep them out and not let them get in the first place. We do that through effective proofing, which we'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. We do it through restriction. Restrict their ability to get hold of food. Food being one of the biggest drivers in a pest's life. Let's restrict that by removing waste. Let's not hoard food. Let's not store food inappropriately. We do it through destruction. Once we've detected the fact that a rodent is there, we will have to go into some sort of destruction program. and we would need to decide which is the right program for that set of circumstances. Is it trapping? Is it rodenticide? Or is it another method of control? But that control has to be appropriate for that scenario and that particular species. And finally, M for monitoring. It's really, really important that we monitor the control, but also afterwards, once we've completed the control program, that we actually continue to monitor in case any more rodents do come back. And it's that monitoring, which is the early warning detection system, that is really vitally important. Next slide, please. Proofing is really, really critical. This comes back to exclusion. Let's keep these rodents out of the building. Rats can get through a gap of around about sort of just over 1.5 centimeters almost, basically. And mice can get through a gap of around about 6 millimeters. So it's really, really important that those gaps are sealed, that we don't accept sort of broken bricks, broken air bricks, gaps under doors, or any other sort of opportunities for those to get in, for those rodents to get in. Proofing can also take place within drains. A lot of rat activity that is getting into buildings is often associated with defective drainage systems. And it's vitally important that they're inspected and then maintained. And that could be through digging up the drain and replacing it, or putting a sleeve in, depending on the circumstance. But it's really, really important that that drain defect is essentially rectified. Next slide, please. There are some practical steps you can take to reduce your risk even further. Seal openings and gaps and holes within your building using rodent-proof materials. We're not asking you to rebuild your building completely. What we're asking you to do is actually just seal those gaps up with something that's actually a bit more rodent-proof. Expanding foam certainly isn't acceptable. Rodents can chew through that within minutes, whereas sort of a good quality mortar mix, or even some specialist proofing materials that have got things like ceramics and little metal filings in, are often quite sufficient. Make sure that loading doors and loading docks seal flush to the ground and sides. Any expansion gaps that are within your property, make sure they are filled and sealed. They're quite often used by rodents as little subterranean highways. Screen and cover outdoor vents, especially louvre doors. Get 5mm weld mesh behind them. That's really, really useful to stop things climbing up through the louvres. Keep all doors closed when not in use, certainly at night time. Remember, these are nocturnal animals, but if our doors are open, for any particular reason, rodents could come in. Keep your vegetation trimmed, certainly around the building perimeters, because it's that harbourage that the rodents certainly want, especially rats. That's where they'll particularly burrowing within that vegetation. And if it's close to the building, they've only got to literally cross a very short distance, and that's it. They could be into the building or up against the building where they've got an opportunity to get in. Store grains, cereals, and other dry foods in airtight containers. Think about things like bird feed. Make sure they're stored in suitable tubs. Don't leave them out, because those bags will be chewed through in minutes. And that's a great opportunity for rodents just to feed. Remove clutter in storage areas to reduce rodent hiding places. Clutter is a rodent's friend. It provides cover, it provides protection. It might even provide nesting material as well. So it's vitally important that that clutter is removed. If you know it's clutter, it's probably good for a rodent. So let's get it shifted. It shouldn't be there. Keep outdoor rubbish bin skips tightly sealed. Quite often a weak point on the bins, certainly on the big wheel bins, is the bung in the bottom. There is a bung that is often removed to allow the bin to be cleaned out, but very rarely are they replaced, and quite often they go missing. If you put that bung in, it stops the rats from getting into that bin and feeding. And remove any obvious water sources. Remember, a rat definitely needs liquid water, and a mouse will drink liquid water as well if it's available to them and they've not got moist food. So any obvious water sources, such as leaking roofs, pools and and puddles within the plant or the premises certainly would need to be removed. Next slide, please. It's really important that you future-proof your business. As pest controllers, we're being always challenged to make sure that we use rodenticide in a responsible way. The use of rodenticide is consistently or constantly tightening on us, and we should only be really using rodenticide as a last resort these days, and certainly where other options are not suitable. Okay. This is really to protect the environment. It's to protect the wildlife that are present within our ecosystem, because what we are finding now is that rodenticide is actually getting into that wildlife and moving up the food chain. These regulations have been in place for a number of years, but they are constantly being reviewed. But as a professional pest controller, we must comply to this campaign. One of the systems that we use, Pest Connect, fully complies with CREW because we use CO2, carbon dioxide, which is highly humane and actually leaves no residues in the environment. And it keeps us very, very compliant with CREW. We also have dual auto gate. This gate protects rodenticide within the bait boxes where we've deployed the rodenticide, and it minimizes that exposure to non-target species. It enables us to keep an eye on that rodenticide, and when it's connected, it gives us an alert to say that the box has been opened by a rodent and that we need to come and check that rodenticide and deploy some more. Next slide, please, Amy. I think now I hand you to Berwyn.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Paul. So yeah, as Paul said, we do have a connected solution that we can offer our customers in the form of Pest Connect, and we do use a number of different devices that Paul has already alluded to there in order to effectively monitor for and control both rats and mice, but actually do it in a really sustainable way as well. So, allowing us to monitor for and control rodents 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without actually having any sort of harm on the environment. And Paul's already mentioned the PestNet radar there, which is our 21st century mousetrap that gives an early warning of mouse activity, but actually controls the mouse using carbon dioxide in order to humanely dispatch it. The Dual Auto Gate Connect is a unit that we use externally in our perimeter bait stations, again, in order to effectively monitor for any external rodent activity. The gate actually separates the rodenticide from the outside world, so we only target the pest that we need to affect with regards to the rodenticide. The Rat Rodents Connect is, again, our 21st century rat trap that we put into those areas where rats may be likely to be running within a building, maybe either side of doors, wall voids, ceiling voids, floor voids, anywhere where there's quiet and dark, where we need to monitor for rats. And then all of those devices are obviously used on site to monitor 365 days of the year, which are all then reported on via our My Rentokil reporting system, which is our online system that allows our customers to view their records wherever they are in the world, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on laptop, tablet, or even smartphone. Okay, and then if you take me to the next slide, I'll just run you through some quick benefits around Pest Connect as well. I already mentioned that the system allows for connected 24/7 monitoring and control. It's not just about having a system that's connected to the internet to give an early warning. We need to make sure that we have the expertise and the right number of technicians around the UK that can actually respond to any call outs as well. And obviously with Rentokil being the UK's largest pest controller, you are never more than 30 minutes away from one of our pest control technicians. The products that we have are unique and innovative and very effective, and obviously provide an early warning in order to monitor and control rodents. And then each day we actually upload thousands of pieces of information directly from Pest Connect or from My Rentokil that allows us to build up an image of actually what's happening on our customer site or across their estate, which allows us to provide a better form of pest control to our customers. And of course, we need to talk around sustainability as well. Using a system like Pest Connect, we can actually save our customers up to 40% in rodenticide use, because we don't use any rodenticide internally with the use of the radar device, and because we can reduce the amount of wastage of external rodenticide using the dual automated connect, we can actually save the amount of rodenticide that we're using, which obviously helps protect your reputation, but also reduces the risk to the environment as well. Okay, the next slide, I think, is a Q&A slide. So Amy, I'll hand over to you to see whether there's any questions from our audience.
Thanks, Berwyn. So just a reminder, everyone, that the Q&A button is at the bottom of your screen. So if you just click that button, you'll be able to type in any questions that you do have. And we have had a couple of questions come in as the session's been going on, so I'll deal with those first. So they're both around Pest Connect. The first is just around the cost of the system.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So the cost will obviously vary from customer to customer, but the way the Pest Connect works is because we are monitoring for rats and mice 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we don't necessarily need to do the standard sort of 8 visits per annum. So what we typically do for our customers is actually reduce the number of visits on contract from 8 to 4, and then generally that will then offset the cost of any equipment. So in many cases, it is cost neutral, but obviously if any of our customers want a survey in order to get some more information about Pest Connect and to review the costings, then obviously we can do that free of charge.
Great, thank you. The other question we have is around the Pest Connect devices, so if they are humane.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, just taking the radar as an example, the radar is very humane. It doesn't use any rodenticides at all. The mouse will go into the radar, the doors will then close, carbon dioxide is then pumped into the chamber, which essentially first of all puts the mouse to sleep, and then the mouse will die eventually through the process of a buildup of carbon dioxide in the system. So again, it is a very humane way in order to dispatch rodents.
Thanks, Berwyn. They're all the questions that have come through in the session.
Okay, excellent. I just want to thank Paul and Amy for presenting and hosting. Thank you for your time today. Obviously, as businesses out there, I have no doubt that you're particularly busy. Obviously, if you do need to contact us to learn a little bit more about rodents or Pest Connect or anything else to do with pest control, obviously our telephone number, email, and website is on the screen. Feel free to contact us at any time. Okay, thank you for your time today.